Right now, tonight, in a cathedral in Valencia, Spain, a small dark cup sits inside a gold reliquary studded with pearls and gemstones. A guard stands near it. Tourists press their faces toward the glass. The Catholic Church considers this cup a serious candidate. Popes have said Mass with it. It has its own chapel. In Rome, the Vatican holds another candidate. In Jerusalem, a third. In a small church in Antioch, a fourth. In the English countryside, a fifth. In a monastery in Armenia that most people have never heard of, a sixth. 6 cups, 6 institutions, 6 claims, 1 story. And somewhere behind all 6 of them, behind the gold and the glass and the pilgrims and the priests, there is a wooden table in an upper room in a city under Roman occupation, and a man is pouring wine into a cup that nobody is going to catalog, nobody is going to preserve, nobody is going to name. It is a peasant's cup, clay, most likely, or simple carved stone, worth nothing. The kind of cup a working man in first-century Galilee would have drunk from at the end of a long day. If you had been standing in that room, you would not have looked at it twice. And yet, what happens over that cup in the next few hours will send human beings on a search that lasts 2,000 years and still has not ended. This is not a story about a treasure hunt. This is not a story about medieval knights. This is not a story about a cup. This is a story about the most important meal in human history, and what the man at the head of that table knew that night that no one else in the room had yet understood. Because here is the thing that most people who have spent their lives searching for the Holy Grail have missed entirely. The man who held that cup told you, the night he held it, exactly where it would end up. He told you what it would become. He told you who would have it. He told you what to do with it. Most people just weren't listening. Stay with me, because by the time this is over, you are going to see that the greatest treasure hunt in human history ended before it began, and the cup was never lost. It was passed to you. To understand what happened that night, you need to understand what kind of meal this was. This was not a dinner party. This was Passover. Every Jewish family in Jerusalem that night was doing the same thing, gathering around a table, remembering the same story, following the same ancient order, the Seder. And the Seder has a structure that has not changed in 3,000 years. It has prayers, it has food, it has readings from the Torah, and it has 4 cups of wine, 4 cups, each one with a name, each one tied to a promise God made to Moses in the book of Exodus, chapter 6. 4 promises, 4 cups. The first cup, the cup of sanctification. You are set apart. The second cup, the cup of deliverance. You are brought out. The third cup, the cup of redemption. You are redeemed. The fourth cup, the cup of praise. You are taken as my own. 12 men around a table in an upper room in Jerusalem, a meal they have eaten every year of their lives. And then Jesus picks up the third cup, the cup of redemption, and says something that stops the meal completely. The Hebrew word for cup is kos. The Greek word, the word Matthew and Mark and Luke all use when they write this down, is poterion. And poterion means more than a drinking vessel. It means a portion, a lot, the cup of one's fate. When you say in Greek that someone must drink a certain cup, you mean they must accept what has been given to them. You mean they must live what they have been handed. Jesus picks up the cup of redemption, and he says, "This cup is the new covenant in my blood, poured out for you." Not a new tradition, a new covenant. The Greek word is diatheke, and in Greek law, diatheke does not primarily mean a treaty between 2 equal parties. It means a last will and testament, a dying person's final declaration of what they are leaving behind. Jesus is not signing a contract at that table. He is writing his will, and the cup is the inheritance. Here's what most people miss. He stops before the 4th cup. He takes the 3rd cup. He blesses it. He passes it around the table. 12 men, one cup, one room. And then, before the Seder reaches its proper conclusion, before the meal is finished, he stops. He looks at the fourth cup and he says, "I tell you, I will not drink of this fruit of the vine from now on until that day, when I drink it new with you in my Father's kingdom." The fourth cup sits on the table, untouched, the cup of praise, the cup of the promise that says, "You are taken as my own." He leaves it there, unfinished, on purpose. He walks out of that upper room with the Passover incomplete because he intends to finish it somewhere else, at a different table, at a time that has not come yet. The 12 men follow him out into the night. None of them understand what he just did. But it gets stranger. They walk to a garden on the slope of the Mount of Olives, the Garden of Gethsemane. The word Gethsemane in Aramaic means oil press, a place where olives are crushed to extract what is inside them. And in that garden, Jesus falls on his face in the dirt, and he prays the most human prayer in all of Scripture. "Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me." Same word, paterion. But this is not the clay cup from the upper room. This is the cup of suffering, the cup of divine wrath poured out on human sin. This is the cup the prophets describe, the one that no human being could drink and survive. You need to feel the weight of what you are watching. This is not a man performing courage. This is a man with a human nervous system and human fear. A man who looks at what is coming and asks, with everything in him, if there is another road. There isn't. He says, "Nevertheless, not my will, but yours." He drinks the cup, not from clay, from surrender. Pay attention to this. Because when the soldiers come with torches, and Judas leads them to the garden, and Jesus is arrested and dragged through 6 illegal trials in a single night, a man watches from a careful distance. He is wealthy. He is powerful. He sits on the Sanhedrin, the same religious council that is voting to execute Jesus. His name is Joseph of Arimathea. John calls him a secret disciple, a man who believed but had not yet said so out loud, a man who had too much to lose and had been protecting it carefully for a long time, until now. Joseph goes to Pontius Pilate personally and asks for the body of Jesus. You need to understand what that cost him. You do not go to the Roman governor and ask for the body of an executed criminal unless you are prepared to be permanently associated with that criminal. Joseph is done being secret. He wraps the body in linen. He lays it in his own tomb. He rolls the stone. And the legend says he also took the cup. The great Jewish historian Josephus, writing in his Jewish Antiquities around AD 93, catalogues the sacred vessels of the temple in extraordinary detail: the golden lampstands, the showbread table, the instruments of the priests. He lists everything the Romans seized when they destroyed Jerusalem in AD 70. He is meticulous. He does not mention a cup from the Last Supper, because it was never in the temple. It was in an upper room, in the hands of a secret disciple who had just stopped being secret. And after that silence. So let's take stock of what you have seen so far. 3 cups. A cup lifted at a Passover table, turned into a last will and testament by the man who held it. A cup in a garden that was never made of clay, a cup of suffering, accepted on his knees in the dirt. And a cup that vanished after the worst weekend in human history, into the hands of a man who had everything to lose and gave it anyway. 3 cups. And a fourth one, still sitting on a table somewhere, unfinished. If this is helping you see the Bible in a way you never have before, subscribe. It genuinely helps this channel reach people who need it. And we are not done yet. Because in the second half of this video, I am going to show you what happened to that cup over the next 1200 years. How an entire civilization built cathedrals and launched crusades searching for it. And then I am going to show you what Jesus actually said. The cup would become. It is not what the legends say. It is not what the treasure hunters found. and it will completely change the way you think about the next time you hold a communion cup in your hands. Here is the first thing that should stop you cold. The earliest written account of the Last Supper is not in Matthew. It is not in Mark. It is not in Luke or John. It is in a letter written by the Apostle Paul to a church in Corinth around AD 55. 25 years after the night it happened, Paul was not at the Last Supper. He met Jesus on a road after the resurrection, but he received the account directly and passed it on. He writes in his first letter to the Corinthians, chapter 11, "The Lord Jesus, on the night he was betrayed, took bread, and in the same way, after supper, he took the cup." Paul quotes the Last Supper in full. He gives instructions for how to observe it. He tells the Corinthians exactly what the cup means and what it costs to take it carelessly. He spends an entire chapter on it. He never once asks where the physical cup is, not a single line, not a single instruction to preserve it, find it, or venerate it. For Paul, writing just 25 years after the event, while eyewitnesses were still alive, while people who had sat in that upper room were still breathing, the cup was entirely about the act, not the object. The cup was something you did, something you repeated, not something you locked in a reliquary and placed under guard. And this is where it gets remarkable. 40 years after Paul's letter, a document called the Didache was written, dated somewhere between AD 80 and 120, older than most of the church traditions you grew up with. It is one of the oldest Christian texts outside the New Testament. It contains a complete order of service for the Eucharist. It tells you what prayers to say, what words to speak over the cup, in what order to proceed. It says nothing about a physical chalice to be found or kept. It treats the cup as a living act of the community. The earliest Christians were not treasure hunters. They were not searching for an object. They were the cup. Every time they gathered, every time they poured and passed and remembered, they were doing what he asked. Nothing was missing. Nothing needed to be found. And then something changed. Here's the part nobody tells you. Eusebius of Caesarea was the first great historian of the Christian Church, writing around AD 313, the same year the Emperor Constantine legalized Christianity across the Roman Empire. Eusebius documented everything: the martyrs, the bishops, the letters between churches, the sacred objects. He had access to archives and collections that no longer exist. He is the single best window you have into the first 3 centuries of Christian history. He does not mention a preserved cup from the Last Supper, not once, but the moment Christianity became legal, the moment it became safe, then fashionable, then politically advantageous to be a Christian relics, began to appear pieces of the true cross, thorns from the crown, nails from the crucifixion, and eventually, cups. The physical world suddenly needed physical proof, and so the search began. The first written Grail story does not appear until AD 1181, 150 years after the Last Supper. A French poet named Chrétien de Troyes writes a tale called Perceval, in which a young knight encounters a mysterious procession carrying a glowing object called a Graal. The word Graal in Old French means a wide, deep serving dish used at formal dinners for fish or meat. Not a cup, not a chalice, a dish. 20 years later, a German poet named Wolfram von Eschenbach writes Parzival the most complete version of the legend. His Grail is not a dish. It is not a cup. It is a stone that fell from heaven. Within 40 years of the first written Grail story, 2 of the greatest literary minds of medieval Europe cannot agree on what the object is. The tradition is already fracturing. And yet the search accelerates. Cathedrals go up, crusades are launched, kings fund expeditions, and at least 6 serious institutions arrive at 6 serious cups and call each one the real one. The Antioch chalice, discovered in 1910 and briefly celebrated as the discovery of the century, turns out to be a decorative outer case, beautiful, undeniably ancient, but almost certainly not the cup itself. The Valencia cup has a stronger archaeological case and a longer chain of custody, but its stone base dates to a different period than its agate bowl, which means someone assembled it from parts, which means the history runs out, just stops somewhere in the 1st century, in the hands of a secret disciple who stepped out of the shadows too late to leave a record. And you can feel it unraveling the closer you look. Nobody agrees. Nobody can agree. Now watch what happens next. Because the cup does not disappear from the Bible when it vanishes from history, it reappears at the very end in the book of Revelation. John, the last living disciple, exiled to a black volcanic island in the Aegean Sea, receives a vision, and in that vision, 2 cups appear. The first is the cup of God's wrath poured out on the corrupt city, judgment made liquid. The second is not a cup at all. It is a voice saying, "Freely give to anyone who thirsts the water of life." The Bible opens a loop with a cup at a Passover table. It closes the loop with 2 cups at the end of history. And right in the center of that loop, unfinished, still waiting on the table, is the 4th cup, the cup of praise. Before I show you what Jesus said would happen to that cup, I need you to do something. Think about someone you have lost, a parent, a grandparent, someone whose hands you can still picture clearly, even now. And think about something ordinary that belonged to them, something the world would assign no value to whatsoever. A chipped coffee mug, a worn cardigan, a pair of reading glasses with one arm slightly bent from years of use. You could not sell that object for $1 at a yard sale. A stranger would walk past it without a second look. But you would not take $1 million for it. Not because of what it is, because of who held it. Because of what was said over it, around it, through it, because of the specific weight of a specific person's life that has somehow settled into a plain, unremarkable thing. Now multiply that feeling by the entirety of human longing, by every person in every century who loved Jesus and wanted something to hold, something physical, something they could put their hands on and say, "Here, right here, he was here," and you begin to understand what the search for the Holy Grail actually was. It was not greed. It was not superstition. It was grief. It was the oldest grief in the world. The grief of people who loved someone they could no longer touch. And here is where the 4th cup comes back. Remember what Jesus said at that table. He took the 3rd cup, the cup of redemption, and he passed it. And then he stopped. He looked at the 4th cup, the cup of praise, the cup of the promise that says, "You are taken as my own." And he said, "I will not drink this again until I drink it new with you in my Father's kingdom." He left it unfinished. He walked out of the room with the Passover incomplete, and then he was arrested, tried, crucified, and on the cross, in John's Gospel, a soldier lifts a sponge soaked in sour wine to his lips. It is the last thing Jesus drinks before he says it is finished and bows his head. Some scholars believe this sour wine, this soldier's sponge is the 4th cup, the cup of praise. Drunk in the worst possible way, in the worst possible place, completing the Passover on a Roman cross outside the city walls. Finished. And then 3 days later, the tomb is empty. And 40 days after that, he is gone again, ascended. The disciples standing in a field staring at the sky, and they go back to Jerusalem. And they gather in rooms. And they do what he told them to do. They take bread. They pour wine. They remember. Here is the Greek word you need. The word Jesus used at the Last Supper, when he said, "Do this in remembrance of me." That word is anamnesis. In Greek, anamnesis, and it does not mean what you think it means. Anamnesis is not simple recall. It is not nostalgia. It is not trying to picture a face that is getting harder to see. In Greek philosophy and in Jewish liturgical tradition, anamnesis means to make the past present again, to collapse the distance between then and now, To bring the event, the actual event, not just the memory of it, into the room where you are standing. When Jesus says, "Do this in anamnesis of me," he is not asking you to remember a meal that happened 2,000 years ago the way you remember a childhood birthday. He is saying, when you do this, I am there. The table in that upper room and the table in front of you are the same table. The cup he held and the cup you are holding are the same cup, not a metaphor, a claim. Every communion table in every church, in every country, in every century since AD 30 has been the upper room. Every cup has been the cup. Every time bread is broken and wine is poured in, his name, the Passover that started that night, continues. The fourth cup is not finished yet. He said he would drink it new in the kingdom, and the kingdom has not fully come, which means every communion service is the church holding the cup open, waiting, keeping the table set, saying, "We remember. We are still here. Come and finish what you started." The cup was never in Valencia. It was never in the Vatican. It was never behind glass in a cathedral that took 300 years to build. It was passed around a table to 12 terrified men on the worst night of their lives. And it has been passed around ever since. Across every continent, in every language, in gold chalices and clay bowls, and plastic thimble cups, and carved wooden vessels, and paper cups at hospital bedsides, passed and passed and passed. 2,000 years without stopping. This is not a story about an object that was lost. This is a story about a promise that was kept. So let me leave you with 3 things. The first is this. The physical cup from the Last Supper almost certainly did not survive the first century. No historian recorded it. No early church father claimed to possess it. Eusebius cataloged 3 centuries of Christian history and said nothing. The trail runs out in the hands of a secret disciple in Jerusalem, sometime around AD 30, and it never reappears. Every cup behind every glass case in every cathedral is a candidate, not a confirmation. The honest answer, historically, is that we do not know, and the staggering thing is it does not matter. The second is this. Every generation searches for something to hold. Something physical that proves the spiritual is real, that the story actually happened, that the love was not a legend. That longing is not foolish. It is one of the most human things about you. Jesus knew you would feel it. He anticipated it at that table before anyone in the room knew what was coming. And he gave you something to hold. He called it a cup. He said, every time you do this, I am there. And the third, the one I want you to carry out of this video, is this. 600 years of nights, crusades, cathedrals, excavations, entire civilizations reorganized around the search for a cup that was never hidden. And the whole time it was being passed around tables in living rooms and sanctuaries and hospital chapels and prison cells and mud-floored churches on 6 continents, passed to farmers and kings and children and dying men and women who had nothing left but the table in front of them. If you have ever held a communion cup, cracked plastic, chipped clay, gold-plated paper, you have held the Holy Grail, not a metaphor. The real thing, the cup of the new covenant, the last will and testament of the man who held it first. Which moment in this video landed hardest for you, the unfinished 4th cup, or the idea that every communion table is the upper room? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. And if this changed the way you see the Bible, subscribe. There is so much more to show you. The greatest treasure hunt in human history ended in an upper room 2,000 years ago. The cup was found. It was passed to you.